So, Ed Davey, this is your first conference as leader, it occurred to me today.
Well, I had a spring conference
your
last
first
March,
autumn
but my
conference.
first autumn conference.
First since 2019 for the party. How
Yeah,
are you
well-
finding it?
Well, because we had, first of all, the pandemic, and then
Yeah.
Her Majesty died last year and we cancelled it. But I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I've been to almost every Liberal Democrat conference since 1989.
Year of
and
my birth.
I love Bournemouth. So, yeah, it's great to be back. And do you know what? One of the things about a conference, certainly for the Liberal Democrats, it's a bit like a sort of family gathering.
Yes.
And, you know, the gathering of the clan. And it's, yes, you have the debates and you get the
Yes.
passions and all that, and you do the media interviews and stuff, but it's actually around the bar in the fringes. And there's a real buzz this year. There's a real buzz about the Lib Dems here.
I've been reading through your plan that you've published. 50
Oh,
points.
our pre-manifesto.
Your pre-manifesto, which actually in some ways reads a bit like a manifesto. I mean, some bits of it are quite detailed. I just want to focus on a few areas just before we talk more generally. One is obviously about housing, which is that you're talking about today at a conference and your party is debating it. You told Sky on Sunday, watched your interview there, you said that I want to be a builder, but I want to be a builder in the places where people want houses built. Now, which people?
People who need better houses. I mean, if you look around the country, you see real housing need. In my constituency, for example, my wife is a councillor, and she's the lead on housing in Kingston Council. And when you look in my area about council, about the housing need, it's often people who need social housing.
Yeah. And you have a very ambitious target on that.
And
you've unveiled.
we've got the first party ever to have
150,000 a year.
a social housing target. And I'm really proud of Emily, actually, because she is building more council houses.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you go around the country and you look at Liberal Democrats running councils, I mean, increasingly running many more councils, we do put some stress on building those houses because we're dealing with some of the housing need which has not been dealt with by the Conservatives.
But you have you have a very ambitious social homes target, as you say, 150,000. It's estimated we need 90,000 a year, so it's way above that. But I'm struck that you don't have a target about private homes and private home buildings. Indeed, what is being debated right now, by the time people listen to this, the vote will have been in, is you resiling from this idea of centrally imposed housing targets. Now, why are you so ambitious on social homes, but not on homes for people to go out and buy, that young people need to go out and buy?
Well, on social homes, the state is very involved in that, right?
Yeah.
It's often state land, state money, in order to make sure we can house people who can't afford housing. And that's quite a tradition in the UK. And I think it's what's been missing from a lot of housing policy in the past. But on private housing, go to your question, I don't think a target really works. Targets in the private sector, as has been proven, don't lead to more houses. The key thing in housing policy, which we're advocating, is a community-led approach.
But you know as well as I do, Ed, you know that when you put communities in charge of making these decisions, they always say no.
No, that's
because
not
they
true.
always they
No,
do
no.
often say no. It makes it harder
Lewis.
because they say, as you well know, they'll say, of course we want more housing, but just not here. And you're letting down. There's the potential of letting down
Lewis,
young people.
I'm afraid I have to correct you there because I've got evidence that is completely against what you just said. Liberal Democrats legislate for what's called neighbourhood plans. What neighbourhood plans are, they allow communities to take the lead, to say what are the houses we need in our community, what are affordable ones, what's sustainable, what's the community infrastructure, the GP clinics, the water infrastructure and so on. So you get the community infrastructure. And those neighbourhood plans, according to a report by the government department with responsibility for housing, after a few years of that legislation being in place, those plans led to more housing being built, an increase in housing supply, and those houses were more in tune with the local neighbourhood and the needs in that local area. And crucially, it built the community infrastructure. So I know you're about to read.
But why is it then? I was speaking to one of your activists just about an hour ago, young man,
Yeah.
and he's handing out these leaflets. And he says he's been in the party 10 years, and he says, obviously people can't see this,
I can't
who are
see it.
listening to the
I
show.
haven't seen
Well,
it
I'm
before,
showing it to
so-
the cameras. It says, stop press, Lib Dem set to lose the youth vote for the second time in a decade. Here's how to stop it. And imploring party members to vote against your proposals and what you want to do. So why is it that members of your own party, younger members of your own party, are not convinced by what you've just said?
Well, I haven't spoken to that person individually. I'm really proud that our party has these debates. Whether it's our pre-manifesto you alluded to, and we'll talk more of the housing there, or debates on housing. And it's really important to have that debate because it teases out the particular arguments.
It's
And
not
there's
just this person, though, is it? The chair of the Young Liberals group, Janie Little, wrote in Liberal Democrat Voice in August that this proposed motion falls far short of the basic motion of liberalism. The housing motion and policy paper coming to the conference process proposes the abolition of national housing targets to be replaced with a NIMBY charter, allowing local councils to pass the buck to the next council for housing young people. Ms Little is right, isn't she? You're basically increasingly a party of older NIMBYs who already have the power and already have the wealth. What kind of liberalism is that? I don't think John Stuart Mill would have much supported that.
And unfortunately, that's simply not true. I gave you some evidence right at the beginning. I'll give you more if you like.
Janie's wrong, then.
Well, I respect Janie, but I'm afraid I disagree with her on this issue. I've worked on housing for many years in my constituency. I've seen the housing problems that are in my surgeries, people who are in overcrowded accommodation, people who can't afford their accommodation, and frankly, it's been getting worse and worse under the Conservatives. But we, in my patch, with my wife Emily leading actually, are building more council homes.
Yes, but with respect, this is bigger than your wife and your local
but
council in which you're a part. I know you're trying to illustrate the point. What I'm trying to say is this.
I think you have to. No, I'm sorry. You have to have examples. I've got concrete examples, excuse the pun, to show that Liberal Democrats in power are building more houses, and whether it's in my patch or in other parts, far from being the NIMBYs, which are actually is an accusation you could put against the Tories increasingly, we are actually facilitating them. And one of the reasons why our community-led approach is the right approach, because if you bring the community with you, you can have what I call YIMBYism. People actually want homes, and because one of the reasons why people object to homes is they think the community infrastructure isn't going to be built alongside
So in brief, more homes in the Blue Wall. You want that?
Where communities come together and plan them properly, so you get everything from the GP premises to the water infrastructure right. Yes, of course.
Okay. I think some people listening might think, look, let's be honest. You've seen the electoral opportunity. You know where it is. You know it's in the Blue Wall. You know it's in these sort of more rural seats, the more anti-development. You just moved there. But then you could just own that. Instead, you're trying to look both ways, and you're trying to say, on the one hand, we want it to be community-led, but also, of course, we want more homes. Just be honest about you're moving to where you think the electoral advantage is.
No, it's simply not true. If you look at some of the homes that are being built by the Conservative approach, the developer-led approach, they end up being the wrong homes in the wrong places. Don't take my word for it. I can quote you Theresa May, former Conservative Prime Minister, who said the Conservative approach was leading to the wrong homes in the wrong places.
She's a bit of a NIMBY as well.
And what we want to do is to make sure we reverse that. And the way to do it is to bring communities with you. And where that has been tried, it has produced more housing. So I'm afraid the facts are on our side. You can have a community approach and you can produce more houses.
We haven't got much time, or rather you haven't got much time, so I just want to move on to a different area. When you saw the Rejoin march at the weekend, what did you think?
Well, I didn't see it actually because here at Bournemouth I heard about it.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people who are pro-European in our country, and the Liberal Democrats are a pro-European party. I've said time and again that Britain should be at the heart of Europe. And we've got debated policy this weekend in that pre-manifesto that you referred to. We've got a very clear pro-European position. I'm very proud of it.
Well, indeed, in your pre-manifesto it says that we need these measures that you're proposing will help to restore the British economy and prosperity and opportunities of its citizens, and are also essential steps on the road to EU membership, which remains our longer-term objective. How long-term are we talking?
Well, what I deal with, particularly for the actual manifesto and the next Parliament, is things that are on the table, and that's not on the table currently.
But you're putting it on the table because it's in your pre-manifesto.
That's the other party. I apologise. And it was a previous conference very recently. We passed a very detailed motion, more detailed than you could in a pre-manifesto document you're referring to, setting out what we call the 4 steps. The 4 steps to re-engaging with Europe, which we want to do because we are pro-European.
Sure.
Was people felt, both sides of the channel actually, that the relationship between Britain and our European friends had been soured very badly. And you're going to spend quite a bit of time, very patient, to rebuild that. The trust that needs to be there has been broken by people like Boris Johnson.
But to be clear, your pre-manifesto is correct. What you've written, it is your longer-term objective to rejoin the EU.
I've said Britain should be the heart of Europe.
Well,
But
Ed, it's in your document.
But Lewis, what I referred to you, and it's really important that I get a chance to explain this to
No,
people.
but sure. I just say, if I remember the public thinking, what does the EU think about? What does the Lib Dems think about rejoining the EU? And then I went on your website and I saw your pre-manifesto, and then it says our longer-term objective remains EU membership. Surely I would be right in thinking that your policy, your long-term policy, is rejoining the EU, but you're not willing to say that.
What I need to say to people in the next election is what we want to do in the next Parliament. And in order to improve our relationship with Europe, we have a 4-step approach. It starts by rebuilding the relationship, as I just said, but it also then goes on in stage 2 to start dealing with some of the problems that were caused by Boris Johnson's awful deal. A deal, I should remind you, that Liberal Democrats voted against, unlike Labour. We voted against that because it would cause the problems that we're now seeing. And we want to tackle those as early as we possibly can. Problems like the red tape and the bureaucracy and the delays and the costs that is damaging our economy, putting prices up in supermarkets. And Liberal Democrats want to make sure that our economy returns to health. One of the key ways, a key part of our economic policy is to deal with some of the damage that Boris Johnson's trade deals has done.
So single market, potentially?
What we're talking about is some of the regulations. They're a disaster.
You're quite aligned with Keir Starmer in that regard.
I don't know what Keir Starmer's position is. I mean, as I say,
what you just said.
He voted for the deal, and I don't see the detail that we've got. We've got huge detail, and in that detail, and if I have a chance to go through what that detail is, it is about removing the problems for traders. But it goes beyond trade. It's also about working with our European partners on things like security and crime. I just find it intriguing, Ed,
that you're not willing to repeat the line that is on your website, that's part of your pre-manifesto, which is that your long-term objective to rejoin the EU. Is it or not?
I couldn't have been clearer, Lewis.
You really could.
No, I couldn't have been. I believe Britain's future is at the heart of Europe. But, and it's a very big but, because the relationship has been so sour, it's going to take some while to rebuild that relationship.
Yeah, that's why it says a longer-term objective.
And rebuild that trust. And it's on the economy, it's on things like supporting our farmers, it's on things like, for example, here's a big issue which Liberal Democrat delegates are really concerned about. Young people's freedom to be able to travel and work and study has been reduced by the Conservatives. And, you were mentioning young people on housing. I think when I talk to lots of young delegates here, they want to make sure that they can work and move and travel across Europe far more freely than the Conservatives want to allow them.
You ruled out a coalition with the Conservative Party. Is a coalition with the Labour Party, is it possible for you? Or did you find the experience of a party of coalition last time just too scarring, no matter what the parliamentary arithmetic?
First of all, you're right to say that I've ruled out working with the Conservatives in any shape or form.
Yeah.
And it's important that people understand why. I fought the Conservatives all my life. I took my seat off them. I fight them in every general election again, normally beating them. I fought them actually in the coalition years. It was difficult, but we fought them in government. And in order to get this discredited Conservative out, we've got to defeat a lot of Conservative MPs. So it would be illogical to then say, having beaten them and fought them, to want to put them back. So we're not going to do that. Beyond that, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals what would happen after the next election, because when I became leader, I made it clear that my top task, in many ways my only task, is to defeat as many Conservative MPs as possible to make sure that the Liberal Democrat number of MPs in Parliament after the next election is as large as possible. We are going to hopefully, by the way, take some seats off the SNP in Scotland, and we're fighting Labour in Sheffield Hallam, for completeness.
Do you think Starmer could be a good Prime Minister?
Well, I do think that he's, from the Labour perspective, he's a breath of fresh air compared to Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn actually caused some problems for the Liberal Democrats. There were lots of people who were minded to vote Liberal Democrat the last election, who didn't like Boris Johnson, who didn't like Brexit, and so on. But they stopped short of voting for us because they were worried about Jeremy Corbyn. And in our target seats, in the blue wall that we've talked about across the home counties, in the West Country, where we used to be strong, and I think we will be recovering in the next election, I don't think Starmer scares people. And I think that's quite important in British politics. I think people need to see politicians who will stand up for their principles.
Could you imagine working with him?
Listen, I'm not going to focus on what happens after the next election. Here's a really important reason, which I've been explaining to people. I probably have to explain it a few times here, I guess.
Well, this is your 20th interview, we're told, so you probably have done.
One of the problems with the Conservatives is they've taken people for granted. And that's why they're so out of touch with what is happening. And if I sort of start speculating about that sort of thing that you're inviting me to do, I think I'll be accused, rightly, of taking people for granted.
Final
I'm
question,
not
then.
going to do that.
Final question then. You've been in government. You're unusual in the history of the Lib Dems in that you're sat here, you're a Lib Dem leader. You've already been in the cabinet. You have to go back quite a long way to find a Liberal in that position. Do you still yearn for government? Did you like being a minister? Would you like to be one again? I know you're not going to get into hypotheticals, but in terms of your ability to change things, you presumably liked it and coveted it, and do you still?
Well, I think it's important to get into power for politicians so they can change things. And indeed, and you know, I come back to my wife in Kingston. She's in power, and she's.
I wish you were here. We could have spoken to her directly. She's come.
Well, she did a fringe early on council housing actually, and Emily is in power in Kingston. She's building council houses. When I was a minister, as you rightly referred to, I partly came into politics because I care about the environment very deeply, and I had the huge honour of being Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change at a time when the Liberal Democrats were leading the way in the UK.
Would you like to be a minister again?
Let me finish. Opposed by the Conservatives,
yeah.
And we made Britain the world leader in renewable power, in offshore wind. I am really, really proud of that. And would one like to have power again? Of course one would. But what the major thing, first of all, is to rebuild the trust with the British people by talking to them, engaging them, and then putting a prospectus before them at the next election, both in individual constituencies and nationally. And that's what I'm going to do. And people can be really clear that we're a pro-European party, we want to get the Conservatives out of government. We've got some fantastic policies on the NHS, cost of living, and on the environment.
Ed, thanks for coming on the News Agents.
Thank
We'll have you on
very
again
much.
soon, I hope, and your wife as well.
I think she's probably going to have to do some reappearance after all that.
Cheers, Ed.
Cheers, Lewis.